Okay, so this is a follow-up to the tuning video we just did. It's the next day, and I've let these heads sit on here overnight, and then I've just played them for about 2 hours. Just practicing, screwing around. And they're starting to settle in. So remember, we talked about the heads needing to settle in for a while on our last video. So now they're doing that. And normally what I'll do is I'll tune them to consonant intervals. So maybe an octave between the top tom and the floor tom. It's a little out. What's going to happen is they're going to go a little lower every time you play them. Even if you do that glue cracking that I showed you, they're going to keep going down as the time goes on. So you'll keep bringing them up to stretch out that head. So I'll do that for my first tuning when I change the heads on my jazz drums. All right? And then as you play them, they'll keep going down. So let's talk about some of these pitches here. And I'm actually going to tune them down just a hair to start with to try to get an absolute octave tuning. All right, so where this is at right now after a couple hours of playing, it was at a B because I had them tuned pretty high. Now it's an A flat. And this drum, more or less, is at an A flat as well. Now this drum is a fourth. So it's going to be A flat, D flat, A flat. So that's kind of a fun tuning to practice with. You can play some melodic stuff. And then on the snare drum, if you remember, on this kit, I tuned the snare drum lower than this first tom. So that is not a consonant interval. And that's on purpose because you don't want the whole kit to be consonant intervals. Otherwise, you get this buildup of tone. Now, the bass drum is also not going to be part of that chord. All right? So that bass drum is basically a D. It's a minor second lower than this, albeit an octave off. So that's a tuning that I do a lot just to get some melodic ideas to practice. I don't necessarily use it if I'm doing a session and playing with a band because, again, if the tonality of the tune is different, it can get funky. You know, Max Roach famously said, a great drummer will beat the drums into the key that the tune's in, which I don't know how to take that. I think that's a great quote. But I think what he meant is a great drummer will make any drum set, no matter how it's tuned or whatever the quality is, sound great. I believe, I'm interpreting that. But that's a famous Max Roach quote. And of course, he was obviously known for playing unbelievably melodically, just a great musician. So I would recommend trying to tune your drums to notes like that to start with and just to play around with some melodic ideas. So you can hear how that's kind of a chord, all right? If we use mallets, I'll just show you quickly what that sounds like. So let's try a dissonant tuning. So what we would do is we would take, where's my sticks? We would take this drum and tune it down maybe a whole step. Now, normally what you do, and this is what I do, is I would do the same with the bottom head. So don't be lazy, just take it off and do the same thing. Again, both heads were tuned to that A flat, so all right. Now, just by changing the one drum, you get a whole nother thing going on. See what I mean? So just one drum, automatically those drums now don't sound like you're playing in a major key anymore. Let's turn the snares on. Now all of a sudden, instead of being pretty, it's dark and nasty, all right? So that's how you can do it. Don't try to change the pitches of all the drums, just one drum. And you can practice doing that like you'd practice timpani. Just tune the drums up to consonant intervals and then just move one. It can be this drum, it can be this drum, but the relationship between the drums changes. You're doing a different chord. So here I have, so we still have the A flat, that hasn't moved. D flat, but now we have like a G or an F sharp somewhere in there. And again, these drums haven't settled yet. Once they settle, they'll stay in tune pretty well, but they're going to be moving around for a while. Now, the floor tom tuning, let's change that. Let's make that a little bit lower. So now we got to be careful we don't get back to our octaves, okay? And I'm not going to change the bottom head right now. Normally I would, but so now we got a G and then an F sharp. That's an even darker tuning. So and again, I'm just changing one drum. Sometimes I'll just leave this drum if I'm using it. I don't always use it, but normally I do. Right on that. I guess that's still gonna be. It's going down now. So now it's a C. It was a D flat. Usually I'll leave it around a D flat. that's a good pitch for this drum. And I'll tune everything around it. For some reason, for me anyway, 12s have always been a difficult drum to get them to, you know, have a good response feel-wise, but also a nice tone that rings. So on this drum, the magic note happens to be like a D flat or a D. On this top drum, that's a lot more versatile. You can go higher, you can go lower, quite a bit, and it still sounds good. So for me, this would be a pretty good gig tuning. I would feel pretty comfortable with that for most things. And I might go ahead and tune this up a little higher. So I hope that's not too confusing. The whole thing is to tune your drums where they sound good individually, but you have to remember that when you're using them as a kit, they have to sound good together, which means no weird overtones, no overly stated, you know, key signature, so you're not messing with the tune if it's not in that key. Now, you could always tune to the key you're in, but the danger if you're doing that is that the drums might be a little bit out of tune, and then it might sound funny with the bass and the piano. Any other chordal instrument, it might interfere. So I try to avoid that usually. And now my bass drum, you know, be careful with that too. If you tune it too high and it rings, that will drive the acoustic bass player, the upright player, crazy. Because they'll be playing stuff and they'll hear that bass drum and it interferes with that. I've had several bass players talk to me about that, and I'm always interested in it. You know, like I'll have a bass player say to me, wow, your drums sound great, you know. I played with this drummer a couple weeks ago, and he was a great player, but I couldn't play because the tuning was so weird, and every time I played a solo and he was playing his bass drum here and there, it was interfering. So don't tune that bass drum too high. And if you do tune it high, it shouldn't ring like crazy. It should be shorter. So you see here, kind of almost a pitch. Can't sing that low. It's almost a pitch, but it's not really a pitch. So you want it on that threshold of being not too high where you could, every time you play it, you hear that pitch over and over again. That's super annoying. You want it lower so it's almost an indiscriminate pitch, but it kind of has a little bit of a pitch. That's the thing you want to do for a jazz bass drum, in my opinion. And I'm sure some of you might vary on that. So I hope this helps, and the next time we'll talk about tuning will be when we do the rock video with all my rock and funk drum kits, and those tamas I used the other day, we'll have those with those pinstripes all ready to go, and we'll talk about tuning again when we do those. See you later.